The war between Russia and Ukraine has dragged into its fourth year, and the situation inside Russia is starting to reveal cracks that the Kremlin can no longer hide. The Russian economy, once a sprawling machine with multiple gears turning, is now almost entirely consumed by the insatiable appetite of its military-industrial complex. Billions upon billions of rubles are funneled weekly into weapons, tanks, aircraft, and recruitment programs, while ordinary Russians feel the consequences in ways that cannot be ignored. People across the country are tightening their belts, skipping luxuries, and even essentials, as prices soar and wages stagnate. Inflation has become a shadow over daily life, making ordinary shopping trips a battle of their own. The cost of living is rising faster than most salaries, and the Kremlin's focus on the war means that basic public services, healthcare, and infrastructure are taking a back seat. It's easy to overlook the staggering human cost of this conflict if all you see are numbers on a screen. But these numbers hide real lives, real families torn apart. Recent figures show that Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties since the war began, with 353,000 of them occurring just in 2025. Thousands more have been wounded, returning home with injuries that require constant care, prosthetics, and long-term support, costs that fall not only on the state but on local regions already stretched thin. Tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, aircraft, and air defense systems have been destroyed in astonishing numbers, representing the physical embodiment of both the Kremlin's ambitions and its reckless spending. And all of this comes at a financial cost that makes even the most audacious government budgets look tame. According to Russia's own Ministry of Defense, total military spending in 2025 is expected to reach 15.9 trillion rubles, almost $200 billion, representing 7.3% of the country's GDP. To put that into perspective, Russia is spending nearly $2.7 billion every single week on a war that the majority of its citizens increasingly want to end. That's money that could feed families, pay teachers, repair hospitals, build schools, and develop infrastructure across the country. Instead, it disappears into the machinery of conflict, funding battles that most Russians no longer understand or support. The dissonance is stark. While the government throws money into the front lines, the people at home are struggling to make ends meet, feeling the pinch of rising prices, shrinking wages, and a creeping sense of hopelessness. Even beyond the obvious costs of soldiers, tanks, and artillery, Russia's regions are forced to cover hidden expenses. Families of the dead, care for the wounded, contract workers, prosthetics, and burials are all additional financial burdens that accumulate alongside an already astronomical defense budget. Independent analysis shows that by the end of 2025, the Kremlin's spending on this war alone will consume over 5% of Russia's GDP, an almost unimaginable portion for a country already struggling economically. Ordinary Russians are seeing their incomes stagnate, their jobs threatened, and their futures clouded by uncertainty, as nearly two-thirds of economic growth in 2025 is being driven solely by defense spending. Consumer behavior paints an equally stark picture. As Russia approaches what should be one of the most festive times of the year, New Year celebrations are noticeably subdued. Families are reducing expenditures, opting for simpler meals, cheaper entertainment, and fewer gifts. According to intelligence reports, average spending for New Year 2026 is nearly half what it was planned to be in 2025. This isn't just about economics, it's a reflection of social fatigue, growing anxiety, and the psychological toll of a nation at war. Travel plans are being cancelled, private vacations abandoned, and alternative, low-cost ways to celebrate are becoming the norm. The human cost extends beyond money and material loss. Thousands of Russians are dealing with delayed salaries, unfair dismissals, and violations of labor rights. Complaints to labor authorities have surged, highlighting a workforce under pressure, while wages fall behind the rising cost of living. Even professions once held in high regard, like teaching, are suffering. Teacher salaries in many regions now lag below the minimum wage, while Russian prisoners earn higher average salaries than educators. This gap is contributing to a growing shortage of teachers, threatening the education system and putting the next generation at risk. At the same time, the Kremlin's strategy of prioritizing military spending above all else has begun to ripple through other industries. Agriculture, construction, steel production, and automotive sectors are struggling to cope with reduced investment, labor shortages, and shrinking demand. Corporate profits outside the defense sector have declined, debts are mounting, and credit risks are increasing. All the while, the war continues to consume more money every week, with little hope of an immediate end. Recruitment trends also reveal cracks in the system. The number of Russians willing to join the fight is slowing, even as signing bonuses and financial incentives rise. Those motivated primarily by money have already enlisted, leaving fewer recruits to fill the ranks. This trend may force the Kremlin into unpopular decisions, like involuntary mobilizations, or ultimately, compel the government to negotiate an end to the war, a step Putin has so far shown no willingness to take. The more the Kremlin continues this unsustainable spending, the more pressure it places on itself, its military, and its citizens. The Russian economy and society are caught in a cycle that grows more fragile with every passing week. Military expenditures soar, public dissatisfaction rises, and the cracks in civil infrastructure widen. Ordinary citizens are forced to navigate a world of rising costs, limited opportunities, and social strain. Meanwhile, Moscow's Grand New Year decorations attempt to mask a reality that citizens feel all too deeply. The human and financial toll of this war has already reshaped the nation, and the path forward is uncertain. As 2026 approaches, the strain on Russia's population is becoming increasingly visible. The social and economic pressure that began as subtle inconveniences has now turned into widespread hardship. Families are cutting back on food, clothing, and other essentials. Savings accounts that once provided a buffer are now being tapped just to cover monthly expenses. Even in larger cities, where incomes tend to be higher, citizens are feeling the pinch. The consequences of the Kremlin's focus on military spending are clear. The war is consuming the nation's resources while the everyday lives of Russians deteriorate. Hospitals report shortages of medicine and staff, public transportation is underfunded, and small businesses are closing at alarming rates. What was once a diverse, vibrant economy is now dominated by defense contractors and industries directly linked to the military. The psychological toll is equally alarming. With uncertainty looming over jobs, wages, and family security, stress levels across the country are rising. Reports indicate a growing number of suicides, domestic conflicts, and alcohol-related deaths during holiday periods. Citizens are increasingly isolated, and social cohesion is fraying. Instead of enjoying the traditional New Year festivities, many Russians are forced to stay home. Celebrating quietly or not at all. The contrast between state propaganda showing a vibrant, confident Russia and the reality of constrained households could not be starker. Families are struggling, children are deprived of educational support, and an entire generation is growing up under the shadow of economic insecurity and nationalistic pressure. On the battlefield, the story is just as grim. Russia's military continues to pour resources into offensives that yield limited territorial gains. Equipment losses are staggering, with thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and aircraft destroyed. These material losses represent not only strategic setbacks but also enormous financial burdens. Each replacement costs billions of rubles, further straining an already overstretched budget. Intelligence and analysis indicate that Russia's military is beginning to feel the fatigue of prolonged conflict. Morale is declining, and the flow of new recruits is slowing. Even financial incentives, designed to encourage enlistment, have failed to fully replenish the ranks. Meanwhile, Western sanctions remain in full effect, restricting Russia's access to global markets, technology, and foreign investments. The departure of multinational companies has further strained domestic supply chains, creating scarcity in essential goods and driving up prices. Ordinary citizens face higher costs for food, energy, and clothing, while wages remain stagnant or fall behind inflation. The combination of these economic pressures with the ongoing military campaign has created a fragile environment, in which social unrest could easily flare. Analysts warn that the longer the Kremlin continues on this path, the more volatile the domestic situation will become. Education, long considered a pathway to social mobility, is also under threat. Teacher salaries have fallen below living standards in many regions, resulting in a growing shortage of qualified educators. Schools are unable to attract new talent, while experienced teachers approach retirement without sufficient replacements. This decline in educational infrastructure ensures that Russia's younger generations face significant challenges, potentially hindering the country's long-term economic growth and innovation. The very institutions that support future development are being undermined by a government strategy that prioritizes war above all else. The healthcare system is under similar strain. Resources are diverted to military needs, leaving hospitals and clinics with limited budgets and staffing shortages. The result is a population that struggles to access timely care, with routine medical procedures delayed or cancelled. Chronic illness management and mental health services, already underfunded, are suffering even more. The combination of economic hardship, social tension, and lack of healthcare support creates a perfect storm for worsening public health outcomes. Even sectors outside defense are seeing dramatic declines. Agriculture, construction, steel production, and other industries face labor shortages, limited capital investment, and reduced domestic demand. Profits are dropping, and companies are forced to either downsize or close entirely. The ripple effects extend to banking and finance, with increasing credit risks and rising levels of personal debt. Ordinary citizens, caught in this economic squeeze, face uncertainty regarding wages, employment, and retirement security. Consumer confidence is plummeting, and the appetite for non-essential spending continues to decline. The Kremlin's relentless focus on military spending is not only reshaping Russia's economy but also its social fabric. Communities are struggling to cope with rising costs and reduced public services. Families face mounting financial stress while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Social unrest, already simmering beneath the surface, could flare if these trends continue. Citizens are becoming increasingly aware that the government's priorities are misaligned with the needs of ordinary people. On the international stage, Russia's prolonged conflict in Ukraine has strained relationships with allies and adversaries alike. Diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, and loss of global trust have compounded internal pressures. Analysts suggest that the Kremlin's continued insistence on funding a costly war risks further alienation, both internationally and domestically. While the Russian government projects an image of strength, the reality is one of economic vulnerability, declining morale, and social fatigue. Amidst these pressures, the Russian military continues to face operational challenges. Casualty rates remain high, while new recruits are increasingly reluctant to join. Financial incentives have only partially mitigated this trend. Analysts from global research institutes indicate that the pool of willing volunteers is diminishing, forcing regional authorities to consider involuntary mobilizations. Such measures would be deeply unpopular and could trigger protests or unrest, further complicating the Kremlin's already tenuous position. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians are paying the price. The effects of prolonged conflict on daily life are undeniable. Consumer behavior is changing, households are prioritizing essentials over luxuries, and social cohesion is under stress. Holidays that were once a time of celebration are now periods of austerity and caution. Rising costs, scarcity of goods, and general economic fatigue have transformed celebrations into quiet, subdued gatherings. Families are improvising, often foregoing traditional festivities, as a reflection of broader national anxieties. The combination of economic strain, social tension, and military overreach creates a volatile environment for the Russian government. Decisions made in Moscow resonate through every layer of society, and the human cost of continued conflict is becoming impossible to ignore. As the Kremlin prepares for another year of war spending, analysts warn that the sustainability of this approach is in serious doubt. If trends continue, pressure on the government could force strategic recalibrations, with potential implications for the future of the conflict and domestic stability. As the war drags on, the cracks in Russia's society continue to widen. Ordinary citizens are increasingly frustrated by the disconnect between the Kremlin's priorities and the reality of their daily lives. While billions of rubles are funneled into military hardware, training, and logistics, many families are struggling just to put food on the table or pay for basic utilities. Housing costs have surged, and rising inflation has made everyday necessities like groceries and clothing far more expensive. The impact of sanctions and the departure of foreign companies has left shelves emptier and prices higher. In some regions, local authorities are even forced to delay salary payments or cut back on essential services, further aggravating public discontent. The strain is palpable, and the question of how much longer the population can endure continues to hang over the nation. Within the military itself, challenges are mounting. Russia's armed forces face a shortage of qualified personnel and experienced commanders, making coordinated operations more difficult and costly. High casualty rates, both among officers and rank-and-file soldiers, continue to take their toll on morale. Replacement troops are increasingly less motivated, and even generous financial incentives are failing to attract sufficient numbers. Analysts from independent research organizations suggest that without a drastic shift in recruitment or strategy, Russia's ability to sustain the offensive in Ukraine will be severely compromised. At the same time, losses of tanks, artillery, and aircraft are mounting, and with each piece of equipment destroyed or damaged, the cost to replace it strains the already bloated military budget. The war, which began with strategic confidence, is now consuming resources at a rate that even the Kremlin struggles to manage. Beyond the battlefield, the social consequences of prolonged conflict are intensifying. Mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders, are becoming more prevalent among civilians and returning soldiers alike. Families are feeling the strain of economic hardship and prolonged absence of loved ones. Schools are overcrowded, underfunded, and understaffed, leaving children with inadequate educational support. Healthcare facilities are stretched to their limits, struggling to provide essential services to a population affected by stress, malnutrition, and untreated medical conditions. These systemic problems threaten the stability and long-term growth of the nation, while the government continues to prioritize military spending above all else. Economic indicators paint an equally grim picture. Russia's GDP growth, once bolstered by diverse industries, is now heavily reliant on the defense sector. Industries not directly related to the military, such as agriculture, construction, retail, and technology, face declining productivity and profitability. Corporations struggle to meet payrolls, pay suppliers, and maintain operations, while ordinary citizens see their wages stagnate or fall behind inflation. Consumer spending has contracted sharply, and household debt is rising, creating a feedback loop of economic stress. The gap between the government's projected defense expenditures and the reality of the public's financial hardship is widening, further undermining confidence in leadership and fueling social tension. Even the traditional cultural and festive periods, which historically brought communities together, have been affected. New Year celebrations, once a time of joy and abundance, have become austere events for most families. Rising costs and economic uncertainty force citizens to prioritize essential spending, while holiday travel, gift-giving, and feasts are scaled back or abandoned altogether. These changes reflect a broader shift in social dynamics, with communities experiencing increased caution and restraint. The psychological toll is significant, as traditions that once united families and neighborhoods are replaced by practical, survival-focused decision-making. Public sentiment regarding the war is also shifting. Polls and intelligence reports indicate that a growing majority of Russian citizens favor a negotiated end to the conflict. Many individuals who once supported or tolerated the war now question its purpose, duration, and human cost. This sentiment is particularly pronounced among younger generations and urban populations, who are more likely to have access to independent media and global perspectives. In response, the Kremlin has intensified propaganda efforts, attempting to maintain public support for the military campaign while managing growing dissent. Yet even the most sophisticated messaging cannot fully mask the economic, social, and emotional impact that years of war have inflicted on the nation. The pressure on the Kremlin is not limited to domestic concerns. Internationally, Russia faces isolation, economic sanctions, and diplomatic setbacks. Its ability to form alliances or attract foreign investment is hampered by the ongoing conflict and the perception of instability. Analysts suggest that the longer the war continues, the more difficult it will be for Russia to navigate international relationships, access technology, and maintain economic growth. Every additional ruble spent on the military reduces the funds available for domestic programs, healthcare, infrastructure, and education, creating a vicious cycle of economic stagnation and social strain. Even military strategy is increasingly constrained by these pressures. With casualties mounting, equipment losses high, and a shrinking pool of willing recruits, the Russian military is forced into defensive maneuvers in some regions while committing to costly offensives in others. Operational efficiency is declining, and logistical bottlenecks compound existing challenges. Analysts warn that prolonged attrition may force Russia to reconsider its objectives or explore alternative approaches to sustain the war effort. Yet for now, the Kremlin continues to prioritize expansionist ambitions, showing little willingness to compromise or scale back its operations. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians bear the burden. Wages are delayed, purchasing power erodes, and public services struggle to meet basic needs. Reports indicate that workers across multiple sectors are experiencing violations of labor rights, delayed salaries, and even unlawful dismissals. Citizens, once confident in the state's ability to provide for basic social welfare, are now forced to navigate a system increasingly dominated by military priorities. The disconnect between government spending and public well-being is widening, and the long-term consequences for social stability could be profound. In the face of these challenges, it is clear that the sustainability of Russia's current path is in serious question. Analysts, economists, and military experts alike warn that the combination of domestic hardship, declining morale, and strategic overextension may force the Kremlin to make difficult choices in the near future. Whether this will involve a shift toward diplomacy, involuntary mobilizations, or even a recalibration of military objectives remains uncertain. What is undeniable, however, is that ordinary Russians are at the center of a rapidly intensifying crisis, with their daily lives shaped by decisions made far beyond their control. As 2026 begins, the cumulative effects of years of war are becoming impossible to ignore. The financial, social, and psychological toll on Russia's population is mounting, and cracks in the system are widening. Citizens are increasingly aware of the staggering sums spent on military operations, sums that could have funded hospitals, schools, housing, or infrastructure projects. Every ruble spent on tanks, artillery, and aircraft is one less ruble available to ease the struggles of ordinary people. Families are forced to make difficult choices between essential needs and minor comforts, and for many, the festive joy of past years has been replaced by financial stress and uncertainty. The disconnect between the government's priorities and public reality continues to fuel dissatisfaction, creating a simmering tension that analysts warn could have long-term consequences for political stability. In the military sphere, challenges persist. Equipment losses remain high, and the human cost continues to rise. Recruitment numbers are declining, even in regions offering generous incentives. Many of those who once saw financial gain or patriotic duty as motivation are now choosing to stay home, leaving a pool of less experienced and less motivated soldiers to fill the ranks. Morale is fragile, and the strain of prolonged conflict is evident across units. Operational setbacks, such as the recent losses in Donetsk, underscore the difficulty of sustaining offensive momentum. Analysts suggest that if recruitment and supply issues continue, Russia may face the prospect of reduced territorial gains or even stalemates, further complicating the Kremlin's strategic objectives. The economic situation adds another layer of complexity. With consumer activity down and businesses struggling, the Russian economy is increasingly dependent on military spending. Key sectors like agriculture, retail, and construction are contracting, while wages lag behind inflation. Labor rights violations, delayed salaries, and layoffs are growing concerns, and citizens are finding it harder to maintain a stable standard of living. Meanwhile, the education system suffers as teacher shortages increase, leaving a generation of children with diminishing support and resources. Healthcare, too, is under pressure, with facilities unable to meet growing demand. These challenges highlight a country whose resources are overwhelmingly consumed by military ambitions, leaving other critical sectors vulnerable to collapse. Public sentiment continues to shift. Growing numbers of Russian citizens favor a negotiated end to the conflict. The realities of lost lives, economic hardship, and social disruption have replaced initial patriotic enthusiasm with fatigue and disillusionment. Families who lost loved ones, faced financial hardship, or endured the psychological toll of war now seek stability over continued conflict. Yet the Kremlin shows no indication of easing its military focus, and propaganda campaigns continue to justify the war while downplaying domestic struggles. The contrast between government priorities and citizen needs has never been starker, and experts warn that sustained public dissatisfaction could challenge social cohesion in ways not seen since the start of the conflict. Internationally, Russia's position is under scrutiny. Sanctions, trade restrictions, and global skepticism continue to limit economic opportunities and isolate the nation diplomatically. Dependence on the defense sector has deepened, leaving other industries vulnerable. Analysts argue that the combination of internal and external pressures may force the Kremlin to reconsider its approach or face long-term economic stagnation. Meanwhile, military expenditures remain staggering. Weekly spending on the war, estimated in the billions of dollars, continues to outpace investments in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. This imbalance highlights a leadership committed to pursuing strategic ambitions at immense cost to its citizens. Social consequences are equally severe. The stress of prolonged conflict manifests in mental health issues, domestic tensions, and social unrest. Ordinary Russians are navigating a world where the state prioritizes military campaigns over community needs, leaving many feeling disenfranchised and powerless. Families scale back celebrations, reduce travel, and curtail spending, while labor violations, wage arrears, and inflation exacerbate hardships. The psychological and emotional burden of living under such conditions is profound, and experts warn of long-term societal consequences if these trends persist. Yet even as challenges accumulate, the war continues, demonstrating the Kremlin's determination to maintain its objectives despite economic, social, and military pressures. The question remains, how long can this trajectory be sustained? Analysts point to declining recruitment, rising costs, and increasing public dissatisfaction as critical factors that could force the government to reconsider its strategy. Some speculate that without changes, Russia may eventually face internal unrest or be compelled to engage in negotiations, though such a path seems politically unpalatable at present. In this environment, the stakes for ordinary citizens are immense. Every financial decision, every adjustment to family life, and every effort to navigate daily challenges is directly influenced by the state's military priorities. Families must contend with rising prices, unpaid wages, and shrinking social services, while coping with the emotional and psychological weight of a nation at war. Schools, hospitals, and essential services struggle to function, leaving communities to find alternative solutions or make do with less. The human cost is as tangible as the financial one, and the longer the war continues, the deeper its impact on Russian society becomes. For the international audience, the ongoing conflict serves as a stark illustration of the consequences of prolonged military engagement. While geopolitical objectives are debated in political corridors, the reality on the ground tells a story of economic strain, social disruption, and human suffering. Observers note that continued escalation may not only prolong instability in the region but also undermine Russia's long-term strategic and economic prospects. The lessons are clear: war comes with costs far beyond the battlefield, and those costs are often borne by the people least able to influence the decisions driving them. As this chapter of history unfolds, the world watches closely. Analysts, journalists, and citizens alike seek to understand the trajectory of the conflict and the decisions that shape it. For Russia, the path ahead remains uncertain, but the pressure on the Kremlin, the economy, and the population will only intensify as time passes. What is undeniable is that the costs of war are real, measurable, and felt deeply by ordinary people. To stay informed on the latest developments, in-depth analyses, and breaking updates from the Russia-Ukraine conflict and other global events, subscribe to Global Focus. By joining our community, you ensure that you never miss critical insights and that you remain ahead in understanding the forces shaping the world today. Don't wait, click subscribe, and stay informed with Global Focus now.